A person who is wrongly accused of a crime may suffer severe consequences, as well as those of their families. Throughout study has been conducted in the literature on the psychological effects of conviction on offenders. Nevertheless, considerably less research has been done on those who have been wrongly accused of a crime and later proved to be innocent. This is likely because it can be challenging to find truly innocent individuals after they have been found guilty. In this video, we will see 7 reactions of innocent convicts who are set free. Number 1. David Ranta. David Ranta spent 22 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Detective Louis Scarcella detained Ranta in Brooklyn, New York. This is also one of the Scarcella convictions that were unjustified. Years later, the key witness allegedly acknowledged that the investigator had given him instructions on which person to select from the lineup. Ranta was identified as the shooter during a police interaction that was coordinated by Scarcella. There was allegedly falsified evidence presented to the jury, and there was no hard proof linking Ranta to the crime. Ranta was then found guilty and sentenced to 37.5 years to life in prison. But following more than 20 years in jail, the former witnesses admitted that they had been forced into making up evidence against Ranta.
Mr. Ranta, to say that I'm sorry for what you have endured would be an understatement and grossly inadequate, but I say it to you anyway. The defendant's motion to vacate the judgment of conviction is granted.
He carried all he owned on his back and hugged his family after his shackles were released. He walks out unharmed. After his release, he reportedly obtained a $6.4 million settlement from the city of New York and $200,000 from the state. Number 2. Stephen Avery. The most well-known case of an innocent man being released from prison involves Stephen Avery. In 1985, he was sentenced to 32 years in jail for raping and attempting to kill a female runner. When new DNA evidence in 2003 proved Avery's innocence of the crime, he had been given a sentence of 18 years in jail. He was ultimately set free, much to his mother's joy. At the time of Avery's eventual release, he was 43 years old. However, his wife had already filed for divorce, and the twin sons he had only just delivered had grown up. Avery made it clear that he had no hatred towards the woman who had wrongly accused him, despite the fact that it was plain that he was thrilled to be free. He clearly focused on appreciating the second chance in life during his press interview, proving that forgiveness is possible even in the most tragic of situations. As viewers of the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer may be aware, this wasn't the end of Avery's narrative, since 2 years after his release, he is still in jail for the alleged murder of a different woman. Number 3. John Bunn. For 27 years, John Bunn was wrongfully imprisoned for murder. When Bunn was arrested by NYPD detective Louis Scarcella in Brooklyn, New York, he was just 14 years old. After serving 16 years in prison, Bunn was released on parole for 11 years, during which time he maintained his defense of his innocence. Finally, Bunn's conviction was overturned due to the misconduct of investigator Scarcella and the fact that there was never any justification for believing that Bunn should have been detained. After 27 years of struggling to clear his reputation, the wrong man who was wrongly imprisoned and found guilty has been released from prison. He spends some time with the judge before leaving the courtroom, though. Later, Bunn brought legal action against the city of New York and Detective Scarcella. Number 4. Luis Vargas. Luis Vargas was imprisoned for a rape he did not commit due to DNA evidence linking him to the 1998 case. Vargas, a Californian, was mistakenly found guilty of a crime that was actually committed by an unidentified assailant, known only as the Teardrop Rapist. The unidentified assailant sexually assaulted 35 women, including children, in LA between 1996 and 2012. Eyewitness accounts that he had a teardrop tattoo beneath each eye gave rise to his nickname. Vargas was sentenced to 55 years in prison on 3 counts of sexual assault in 1999. Vargas had a tattoo of a teardrop, which allowed all 3 victims to identify him as the assailant. Despite being found guilty, though, Vargas always avoided punishment while professing his innocence. Once his appeals were rejected, Vargas contacted the California Innocence Project because they had retested the original DNA and found that it did not match him. Vargas was eventually released in 2015 after serving a total of 16 years as an innocent man, and his reaction was nothing short of immense relief. His daughter's response was heartbreaking, and since she was so confident in her father's innocence, she postponed getting married until after his release. Number 5. Daniel Villegas. Daniel Villegas spent 18 years in prison in El Paso, Texas, for a double homicide he didn't commit. An El Paso police officer allegedly threatened to beat Villegas and murder him when he was detained at the age of 16 if he did not confess. Furthermore, the police made the teenager Villegas sign a prepared confession. He tried to take back his admission a few hours later, but it was too late. He was charged with 2 charges of capital murder, with the false confession serving as the only proof. The jury was unable to agree on a verdict. Villegas was sentenced to life in prison and 18 years in jail following a second trial in which the jury judged him guilty. Villegas was permitted to continue living free on bond while starting a family and getting married when the ruling was overturned. But now that they are in the third trial,
if the defendant will please stand.
This is when Villegas will know whether he gets to go home with his family or is returned to prison to complete his life sentence.
The State of Texas versus Daniel Villegas, verdict form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of... You are no longer under any conditions. You are free to leave. Thank you.
According to reports, Villegas has filed a lawsuit against El Paso. Number 6. Clemente Geary. It all started in 2004 when the Honduran immigrant was accused of killing 2 people. A man who had received the death penalty was currently on death row. Clemente Geary is the man's name. On June 25, 2004, Clemente, who was 24 at the time, was accused of both burglary and first-degree murder in Altamonte, Florida. The offense was not initially committed by him. Agura Harkin claims that he learned the woman he was trying to save was already dead, which is how their blood ended up on his clothes and footprints. His neighbors Carol Barris, 68, and Cheryl Williams, 47, were brutally murdered by stabbing. Despite Clemente's protests to the contrary, the authorities sentenced him to death because they believed he was the only possible culprit. Throughout his 14 years on death row, Clemente never gave up, and he wasn't mistaken either. In the bathroom where the claimed murderer cleaned up the child's blood, and within inches of the mother's body, it was discovered that Samantha Shell's daughter had been diagnosed with intermittent explosive disorder before the murder. A few years prior to this incident, the doctor's notes contain a statement from the daughter to her mother that reads, "I'm going to kill you if I ever get out of here. I'll kill all of you." The daughter left a trail of blood leading to the bathroom, followed by the mother's blood on the outside of the window. When it was discovered that she had admitted to killing her mother and grandmother and had threatened to do the same to Clemente, people from all around the community began to show up and provide testimonies as proof. The day had finally come for Clemente. Number 7. Eugene Johnson, Derek Wheat, and Laurice Glover. The East Cleveland Three, also known as Eugene Johnson, Derek Wheat, and Laurice Glover, were released in 2015 after serving 20 years in jail for a murder that none of them were involved in. The 3 males were imprisoned for the 1995 murder of another kid, but the truth would soon come to light. It was decided that 2 well-known police officers had violated the civil rights of the men when it was discovered that they had suppressed police reports, including favorable witness testimony. It was also uncovered that they had coerced a witness, who was only 14 years old, into making the accusations against the men. Eventually, the witness changed their testimony, and the men's lawyers learned that evidence pointing to a different shooter had been suppressed from the trial. After 20 years in prison, the guys were finally freed by a judge who had been following their case since the beginning of her tenure. The men wept with joy as their families cheered in court and gave tearful news interviews after living in torture for so long. Although the $5 million in compensation each man received, I don't think it will be enough to make up for the fact that dishonest police officers took away their youth and freedom. That's all for today. If you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. Also, express your valuable thoughts in the comment section below. Until then, bye. Also, for more videos like these, click on the links you see on the screen.